Hey everyone, in this video we are building a full stack authentication system from scratch. Users can register, log in, and once they are signed in, they will see their personal info like username and email right on the homepage. So now let's register. And as you can see, on the homepage we can see username and email. We will also test our backend routes using Postman to make sure that everything works correctly. Then we will connect the frontend and backend using Axios, and then we will manage routes with React Router and display user data securely. So whether you're just learning how authentication works or want a clean project to build on, this tutorial is for you. Let's get started. Okay, so here I will open my terminal. You can open your terminal by pressing Ctrl plus backstick. Okay, and now let's write npm init-y to set up our package.json file. We need it to properly manage our Node.js project. So here, as you can see, we have package.json file. Okay, now in the root, I will create two folders, backend and frontend. And now we need to install the following packages. So let's install Express. It's a framework on top of Node.js. Then .env to get access to the environment variables. Then bcrypt.js to hash our passwords. Mongoose to work with MongoDB. And JSON Web Token to create and verify tokens. So let's press enter and install them. Okay, as you can see, here we have our dependencies that we have just installed. And now inside backend folder, let's create a file called server.js. And now here I want to use this import express from Express. I want to use this modern syntax, ES modern syntax, but right now this syntax isn't available to me. By default, this syntax is available to me. It is something like this: const express will be equal to require express. It is CommonJS syntax, but I want to use modern syntax. So for that, inside package.json, under these scripts, we need to write type. And from here, we need to choose module. So let's save our file. And now we can use import express from Express. Okay, let's immediately create an instance of our application by saying const app will be equal to express. And let's say that our app will listen on some port. And for that, we need to create a variable, and it's a better practice to store that variable inside .env file. So in the root, let's create .env file. This file will contain some sensitive information about our project. So here let's create a variable called port, and I will assign it to be 5000. Now to get access to it inside server.js, first of all, we need to import .env from .env. Okay, and we need to say .env.config. So now we will be able to get access to that variable. So for that, let's say const port will be equal to process.env.port. And in case of some errors, we can manually type that it will be 5000. So let's use this variable and put it here. And then we can show in the console something like this. So let's say server started at port and our variable. To use it, here as you can see we use backsticks, and now I need to write a $, then curly braces, and write port. Okay. And now let's say that in the home page we want to show some message. So for that we need to say .get, we need to see app.get, then our path, and here we want to have request and response. So request is what comes to us from our client, and response is what we want to respond to that request. So let's say that in the response, we want to send the message, let's say hello world. Okay, so let's save it. Now to see that, we need to start our application. So now let's start our application. For that, we can say node, and then we need to provide our path to our server.js. We can do it like this, or we can do it differently. I mean, we can start our application differently. Inside this package.json, inside this script, we can say that it will be dev. And here we can provide our path to server.js. So let's say node backend server.js. So let's save this file. And now we can say npm run dev. So let's press enter. And as you can see, we have server started at port 5000. So let's open it, and there we should see this message. So let's do it. So as you can see, I opened this localhost 5000, and here I see this message. Okay, now it's time to get our connection string from MongoDB to be able to work with MongoDB. So let's do it. For that, we can visit mongodb.com, and here let's sign in. If you don't have an account, you need to create an account first, and then you'll be able to do it. I think it's clear. Now let's log in to our account. Okay, and here let's click this button to create our new project. And here we need to provide a name. I will just say MERN, login, and register. Let's click next. Let's click create project. Here, let's create a cluster, and we want to choose this free version, and I don't want to preload sample dataset, so I will uncheck it, and everything else can be left as it is. So let's click create deployment. Okay, and here, just in case, we can copy our password, so let's click copy, and inside .env file, we can paste it here. And let's immediately create a variable called mongo_URI, and here we will paste our connection string very soon. Now let's click create database user and choose a connection method. Here let's click drivers, and let's copy this connection string. Let's paste it here. And as you can see, we don't even need this password because it is already here. Okay. Here we can also create a name for our database. I will just say users. Okay, so let's save it. And here let's click done. And we can click clusters. We can click browse collections. And as you can see, it is empty. Now, sometimes when you work with MongoDB on your local machine, you can see some errors because of the fact that you didn't whitelist your IP address. To prevent that problems, we can come to this network access tab. And here you will see your current IP address, and also you can add a new IP address. And to prevent any problems during local development on your machine, you can click allow access from anywhere and confirm. So by doing this, we just prevent some errors that may potentially occur when we develop something, when we work on our local machines. Okay, as you can see, its status is pending. It will take some time. Okay, now it is active. So let's get back to the code. Now inside backend, I suggest creating a new folder called config. And here we can create a new file called db.js, and let's set up our connection to our MongoDB database. So for that, we need to import mongoose from mongoose, and we can create a new function called export const. Let's say that its name will be connectdb. It will be asynchronous. Okay. Here, let's use try and catch block. let's say that we want to say const con, a short variant for connection. And here let's say await mongoose.connect. And here we need to provide our connection string. So let's say process.env and the name of our variable, which is mongo_URI. Okay, to see if we managed to connect, we can say console.log backsticks, and we can say MongoDB connected. And then we can use this $sign and curly braces, and here we can say con.connection.host, so that if everything is fine, we will see the host in our console. In case of some errors, we can also show them in the console. So let's say console.log error, and in case of some problems, we can say process.exit with 1. It means that it is a failure and our application will immediately stop because of the fact that we provide this 1. It means that it is unsuccessful. Okay, so let's save it. And inside server.js, we can use this function that we have just created. So let's import it first of all. So let's say import connect db. And here we need to write .js, otherwise we will have some errors. And now, before saying app.listen, we can use our function. So let's do it. So let's save our file and open our terminal. Here we will not see anything because we need to stop our server. We can stop our server by pressing Ctrl+C. Okay, I stopped my server and cleared the console. Now let's start our application by saying npm run dev. And as you can see, we see MongoDB connected and this host. It means that we managed to connect to our database and now we can work with it. Okay, so let's close our terminal. And now I suggest to create our user model. So let's create a new folder called models. And here let's create user model. For that, let's create user.js file. And here let's import mongoose from mongoose. Okay, so let's create a variable called user schema. Let's say that it will be equal to new mongoose.schema. Here we want to define what kind of properties we want our user to have. So let's say that we want our user to have username. Let's say that its type will be string. And it will be required, so we want to say required to be true. At the same time, we want it to be unique, so we can say unique to be true. Next, we want our user to have email, so let's say email. And in this case, we can just copy all of this and paste it here. Then we want our user to have password, so let's say password. And in this case, we can copy only type and the required property. Also, we want to know when our user was created or updated. For that, we can use timestamps. So let's say timestamps to be true. Now we can keep track of when a user was created or updated. Okay, now we can add logic to automatically hash user's password before saving it to the database. So let's do it. So here we can say user schema dot pre and save. Okay, so this is a mongoose pre-save hook, meaning that this function runs before a user document is saved. So here we attach the pre-save hook to the schema and it runs before save is executed on a document. Next, we want to have a synchronous function and we want to have next in it. So this is the function that runs before saving. It takes next as an argument, so Mongoose knows when we are done. Okay, then we want to check if a user's password was modified. And based on that, we will take some actions. So let's say if a user's password wasn't modified, so we say if this is modified and password. So by doing this, we check if a user password was modified or not. So this refers to the current user document. So if the password field hasn't been modified, we need to skip hashing and move on. So for that, we need to say next. So again, if a password field wasn't modified, we need to skip hashing and move on. Then if password was modified, we can create a variable called salt will be equal to await bcrypt. But first of all, let's import bcrypt from bcrypt.js. Okay, here we need to say generate salt, and by default we can just say 10. So here 10 is the number of salt rounds, it's a common default. So this line generates a random salt for password hashing. In this case 10 is the number of salt rounds, a common default. Next we can say this dot password will be equal to await bcrypt dot hash, and here we need to provide this password and our salt. So this line hashes the password with the generated salt and overrides the plain text password with the hashed one. And in our database we will see only hashed passwords. And then we can say next. So it tells Mongoose that the hook is done, so it can continue. Okay. Oh, here I noticed a mistake. Here I said get salt, but I need to say generate salt. Okay. Now we need to create a custom method that will check if passwords match. So let's imagine a situation that someone tries to log in and there a user provides a password. So we need to check if that password matches with the password which we have in our database, which is stored in our database. So let's create a custom method. So let's say user schema dot methods, and we can say match password will be equal to a synchronous function which will accept entered password. Okay, so here we just created our custom method. Its name is match password, and here we accept this entered password. It means that this function takes in a plain text password which our user will enter in a login form. Then we can say return await bcrypt dot compare, and we want to compare entered password which was typed by a user, and we want to compare it with a password which we have in our database. So if the passwords match, if they are equal to each other, then this will return true. If they don't match, this will return false. Again, entered password represents the plain text password typed by the user. This .password, it is the hashed password stored in the database. It refers to the user document. Then bcrypt.compare internally hashes the entered password and checks if it matches the stored hash. If they match, it returns true. If they don't match, it returns false. Later in our routes, we will control what to do in case if the passwords match, and what to do in case if passwords don't match. Okay? And you may wonder why we write it here instead of doing hashing in routes. I prefer to do it because it's better to hash the password inside the user model, because it ensures that the password is always hashed consistently and securely, no matter where or how the user is saved, so that we can avoid repetition and potential mistakes in routes. Okay, so now to be able to actually use this user model, we can say const user will be equal to mongoose.model, and here we can say user and user schema. So let's say export default user. So let's save it. Okay. And here we need to say bcrypt, not bcrypt s, otherwise we will have some errors. Okay. We need to be careful when we work with it. So let's save it again. Okay. So now inside backend folder, we can create a new folder called routes. And inside, let's create a new file called auth.js. Here, let's import Express from Express. And here, let's also import our user model that we have just created. And here we need to say .js. And now let's say const router will be equal to express.router. Why we do it? It's like we are creating a new mini Express app just for routes like register, login, and so on. So to be able to work with routes, we say express.router. Okay. Here, let's say router.post, and let's say that the endpoint will be register. And we want to do the following. Let's say that it will be asynchronous request and response. And here we can say that we want to destructure username, email, and password from request.body object. And again, request will come to us from our client. As I said, request is what comes to us from our client, and response is how we respond to that request. Here, let's say that we want to use try and catch block. And we need to check if a username wasn't provided or if email wasn't provided or if a password wasn't provided. We can throw an error with status code of 400, meaning that it was a bad request. And we can say JSON, and in the message, we can say, please fill all the fields. Okay. Then, if username, email, and password are provided, we need to check if this user already exists. So let's create a variable called user exists will be equal to await user, our user model, dot find one method, and we want to look for our user, for our potential user, using email. And if user exists, so let's say if user exists, we can throw another error. We can just copy this and we can say user already exists. Okay. Then if username, email, password are provided and user doesn't exist yet, we can create one by saying const user will be equal to await user.create method. And here we need to provide username, email, and password. Okay. Then in the response, we can say response.status with 201, meaning that everything went successful. Then in the JSON, we can show users data. So let's say ID will be equal to user._ID, email will be equal to user.email, and let's say that we also want to show username, which will be equal to user.username. Okay, and for now that's it. And in case of some errors, in case of some server errors, we can say response.status 500.json, and in the message we can say server error. Okay, now we have just created a route to register a user. So let's say register. Now let's create a route for login. So let's say router.post. The endpoint will be login, and it will be asynchronous request response. And now we need to take some data from our user. So we can just copy this and paste it here. So from our user, we expect only email and password. We don't want to use username in this case. Okay, here let's say try and catch. We can immediately say that in case of some server errors, we can show this message. And then we need to check if email and password are provided or not. For that, we can copy this and paste it here. So if email and password aren't provided, we throw this error and say, please fill all the fields. Then we need to find our user in our database. So let's see, const user will be equal to await our user model dot find one by his email. Okay, then if there isn't a user, or we can say if it isn't true, so we can say await user dot match password and the password that our user typed in the login form. What does it do? The first case, if there isn't a user, it means that the email that a person provided in the login form doesn't exist in our database. It means that this user doesn't exist in our database, and first of all, this user should register rather than trying to log in. So this user should register. Then if there is a user with that email, and we managed to find a user in our database using the email that was provided in the login form, we need to check if the passwords match. Okay, and then let's say that there is actually a person who owns this email, and this email actually belongs to him. And let's imagine a situation that he provides the wrong password because he forgot his actual password. Then what will happen? So then we will compare our password, which we have in our database, which we store in our database, and which is associated with this email. So we will take it as one, and then we will compare this password with the password that this user writes in login form. If they don't match, a user will not be able to log in, okay? And only if a user provides the right credentials, the right password, only then he will be able to log in. I think that is clear to you. If you have some questions, feel free to write them in the comments. So if there is no user, or if the passwords don't match, we can copy this and say that this time the status will be 401, and here we want to say invalid credentials. Okay, but if user exists and his password that he provided in the login form matches the password that we have in our database, then we need to say response.json, and here we can provide his username, email, and ID. And also for the status, we can say that it is 200. Okay, so here 200 means that everything went okay, and here 201 means that the user was created. Okay. So now we have created a route to be able to log in. So let's say log in. And now we need to create one more route called me. So let's say router.get, and the path will be me. So why do we need this route? We need this route. So why do we need this route? We create this route so that this route will send back the currently logged in user's info. Okay, so for now, let's say that it will be asynchronous, then request and response. And here we want to say response with status code of 200. And then we want to say JSON request.user But for now, this will not work because the server doesn't know who me is. We need to protect this route with middleware. So here we want to have this function to protect it, but we don't have this function yet. So let's create that one. Okay. So again, normally we need to protect this route with middleware. In this case, it will be protect. It's just the name of our function. And then in that function, we will check if the user sent a valid token, GVT, in the request. If yes, it finds the user from the database and adds it to the request.user. We will handle it in protect function. So we will create this protect function, and then using this route, we will be able to see currently logged in user info, because here in the JSON we say request.user. Okay. So now let's say that we need to export default router. So let's say export default router to be able to use these routes. And for now, let's just save this file, and inside backend folder, we can create a new folder called middleware. And here we can create a file called auth.js. And here we will create the protection middleware. So for that, let's import user model. Here, let's say user.js. Oops, it has to be dot, not comma. Okay. Then we need to say import GVT from JSON web token. So it's a library that creates and verifies tokens. Okay. So here, let's say export const protect function, which will be asynchronous, and it will have request, response, and next parameters. So here we define an express middleware, and middleware has access to request, the incoming request, response, the response object, and next, a function that tells Express to move to the next handler. Here let's initialize a variable called token, and we shouldn't forget to write the correct syntax. So let's say that here we want to have arrow, and we don't have an error anymore. Then we need to check the following. We need to say if request.headers.authorization exists in the first place. Okay, if there is request.headers.authorization, and then if there is request.headers.authorization, we need to check if it starts with bearer. So let's say starts with and bearer. Okay. So if it really starts with bearer, we need to do the following. But you may wonder what it's like, what it's gonna be. So it will look something like this. Here we will have authorization, then bearer, and our actual token. Okay, so we need to make sure that our authorization starts with bearer. If it really starts with bearer, inside we can continue our logic. Now let's say that token will be equal to request.headers.authorization.split method. And here we need to get access to this token. That's why we use this split and we add space, so that we will not take bearer, but we will take token. So to take token, we need to see that here we want to have one. So this split will create an array. It will be like array. Okay. And here we want to have not bearer and token. If we wrote 0, we would take bearer, but we don't need it. We want to take token actually. And that's why we say that we want to take this token. We can get access to them by indexes. Okay, I think that is clear. Then we can create a variable called decoded will be equal to gvt.verify. And here we need to provide our token that we have just extracted, and process.env. Here we need to provide our GVT secret, okay? But we don't have this variable yet. So now let's remove this. And inside .env, we can create this variable. So I will copy it. Oops. So I will copy it. And inside .env, here I can create this variable. And just for the sake of this tutorial, I will say that it will be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. But in real projects, you shouldn't do it that way. Okay? You should use some really strong key, some long and strong secret. Okay. So let's get back. So here it uses a secret key. In this case, it is JVT secret to verify that the token wasn't tampered with. If it is valid, it decodes the token and returns an object with the user data. So that's why we can say request.user will be equal to await user.findById. And here we need to provide this decoded.id. And then we want to have access to all the properties of users except password. We don't want to show his password, so that's why we say -password. So now request.user object has user info, all user info except his password. Okay. Select -password tells MongoDB to exclude the password field when returning the user. And then we can say return next. So if everything went fine, so we call next to continue to the next route handler. Okay. And in case of some errors, we can do the following. Actually, this code should be inside try and catch block. So let's say try and put it here. And here we want to have our catch. Okay. Here we can say console.error. And we can say token verification failed. And then we can provide error message. Okay. And we can also say return response with status code of 401, meaning that a user isn't authorized. And in the JSON, in the message, we can say not authorized, token failed. Okay, so let's copy this. And if request.headers.authorization isn't provided, we can show this error here as well. Okay, so that's it for protection. I think that it's clear to you guys. If you have some questions, feel free to write them in the comments. Now let's save this file, and inside our routes, we can uncomment it. And let's import this function. Okay. And here I will say me. And as you remember, we used this route to get access to the currently logged in user info. Okay, so let's save it. But before going to do that, we need to create a function which will generate JVT tokens, because here, as you remember, we talked about JVT tokens, but we didn't talk about generating them. So let's create a function for that. So here under this route, we can say generate JVT token, and let's immediately import JVT from JSON Web Token so that we will not face any errors. So let's say import JVT from JSON Web Token. Okay, so let's say const generate token. It will accept an ID of our user. So let's say return JVT.sign using this ID. Okay. And then here we need to provide access to our JVT secret. So let's say, let's say process.env JVT secret. And we need to say when it will expire. Let's say that it expires in 30 days. Okay, so as you can see, this function takes one argument, ID. It's the user's unique ID from MongoDB. And the goal of this function is to return a JVT token that contains this user ID. So as you can see here, we have this ID. So it's the payload, like the data we want to store inside the token. In this case, it stores the user's ID. Later, when someone sends the token back to our server, we will be able to decode it and know who they are. Then here we have process.env.jvt secret. This is the secret key used to sign the token. It's like a password only our server knows. It ensures that nobody else can create fake tokens unless they know this secret. So that's why you need to be very careful when it comes to this JVT secret. And then here we have this expires. It means that the token will expire in 30 days. After that, the user must log in again to get a new token. Okay, now when do we need to use this function? We need to use this function every single time a user logins or registers. So inside this register route, we can use this function here. Let's say const token will be equal to generate token. And here we need to provide user._ID as we said. And then we can show this token in the JSON. Okay. So let's save it and let's copy this, and we can do the same inside our login route. So let's paste it here, and we can also show his token here. Okay, so let's save it, and now we can start testing our routes in Postman. But before that, inside server.js, we need to make some changes. First of all, we can get rid of this because we don't need it at all. And instead of that, we need to use our routes that we have just created. So let's say app.use. Then we need to provide a path. It will be API users and our routes. So let's say auth routes. So let's import our routes. So here, let's say import auth routes from routes auth.js. Okay. So what does this line do? This line registers our user-related routes, like register, login, and so on, under the API users. Okay, so if we want to use the register route, we have this auth routes, okay, and then it will be like this. It will be register, but we don't type it like this. Instead of that, we write auth routes, okay. So it organizes our routes in a clean and modular way. Instead of putting everything in server.js, we separate logic into different files. Like in our case, it's auth.js. So since we have register, it will be accessible like this. And then we also have login, okay? But we don't want to type all of them like that. We just say that it will be accessible by using this path. And then we provide our routes. Okay, I think that is clear to you and you will understand it better as we keep going. And then we need to say app.use express.json. Why do we do it? So this line tells our Express server to automatically parse incoming JSON data in the body of HTTP request. So when we send data from the frontend to the backend, it is sent as JSON. Without this line, request.body will be undefined and we will not be able to access the data. So as you remember, we use this request body here, but without saying express.json, it will be undefined. So we can send something like this when we're gonna log in. So I will just write it as an example. So thanks to express.json, we will be able to access this data in our routes. Okay, this kind of data, we will send this kind of data when we log in, for example, and then we will be able to get access to it by saying request.body. But without saying express.json, we will not be able to get access to this kind of data. I think that it's clear to you. So let's remove it and save our file. Now we can start testing our routes in Postman, so let's do it. So if you are new to Postman, here let's click this plus button and then blank collection, and then we can rename it. So let's say that its name will be MERN login and register. Then here we need to create requests. So we need to add requests. So as you can see here, we created a new request. Here we need to have post method, and then we need to provide the path. Okay, so the path will be like http://localhost:5000/API/users and /register, because we want to create a user. Then we need to go to body, raw, and provide the data. So here we need to have username. So here I will say Frank, then email. The email will be frank@gmail.com, and then password. Let's say that it will be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. Now let's click send. And as you can see, we have an error, not found. So let's find out why we have this error. Okay, maybe we just need to stop our server and restart it because we made some changes in .env file. Sometimes it's the reason of a problem. So let's stop our server, and now I will say npm run dev. Okay, now let's try one more time in Postman. But this time I will provide another data. I will say Martin. And let's click send. And as you can see, that was the reason why we had that error. And now as you can see, we created a user and we can see his ID, username, email, and token. So let's see it in our MongoDB database. So here let's click browse collections. Here we have users and users. So users is the name of our database, and this is the name of our collection. So here, as you can see, we have ID, username, email, and our password, which is hashed. Also, we have access to the data when a user was created and when a user was updated. Now let's try to log in Postman. So for that, here I need to say login, and I need to remove username, and let's click send again. And as you can see, now we have status code of 200 and we managed to log in, and we see ID, username, and so on. Okay, now let's try to get access to the me route. For that, we need to say get, then we need to say me, and we need to copy this token, and inside headers we need to say authorization, then bearer, and this token. So let's click send, and as you can see, we managed to get our users data. Here we have ID, username, email, and so on. But without this authorization, we wouldn't get the access to his data. So let's try to remove it and click send. As you can see, we have this message, not authorized, token failed. So let's put it back and click send one more time, and we managed to get the currently logged in user info. That's great. Now let's get back to the code and work on frontend. So let's close our terminal, and inside frontend, we need to make some changes. So here, let's click one more terminal, and let's go to frontend, and let's say npm create vid at latest, and I will write dot so that everything will be installed exactly inside this frontend folder. Here, let's choose React, then JavaScript, and let's say npm install. Okay, now it's time to connect Tailwind CSS to our project. So let's visit the official website of Tailwind CSS. Okay, so here let's click get started. Then since we use Vid, we are in the right place. So let's copy this and paste it in our terminal. Okay, now we need to make some changes in our vid.config.js file. So let's copy this and let's find it. Here it is. So let's paste it here and let's copy tailwind CSS, and inside plugin array next to React, let's write tailwind CSS and let's save this file. Now let's import tailwind CSS. So let's copy this, and inside source folder, inside index.css, we can remove everything here and paste it. Paste import tailwind CSS. So let's save the file. Okay. Now, before saying npm run dev, we need to do the following. We need to install Axios. So let's say npm install Axios. So we need to install Axios so that our frontend can talk to backend. And let's also install React router DOM to handle navigation. Okay, so let's press enter. And now we can say npm run dev. So let's open it. Okay, now I will split my screen. Okay, so let's close our terminal and we can delete app.css, and inside app.jsx we can also remove this boilerplate code. And here let's create a div and just say hello and remove some of this. Okay. Let's save it. To reset the styles, let's refresh the page, and inside index.html, instead of this default title, we can say MERN login register. So let's save it. Okay, now let's close the tabs that we don't use right now so that everything is clean and we can stay focused. Okay, now actually let's create a new folder called components. And here we want to create a component called navbar.jsx. Okay, and also let's create pages. So let's create a folder called pages, and here we want to create home.jsx, then login, and register. Okay, now inside app.jsx we can do the following. We need to wrap our application in router so that we will be able to handle navigation between pages. So now I will remove this div router. So let's say router, and we need to import it from React router DOM. So let's immediately import it. So I will say import. We need to say browser router as router. Then we can say routes, route, and navigate from React router DOM. Okay, and now we can say that here at the top we want to have our navbar component. So let's save it. And here we have navbar. And also for now we can create routes. And let's say that here we want to have route, and the path will be homepage, and the element will be our home component. So let's say home, and let's import it. Okay, so let's save it. And as you can see, here we have home, and on top of it we have navbar. Also, we need to create routes for login and register. So here it will be for login, and let's import login and then register. Okay, and the path will be register. So let's save it. Now we need to create some states to check if a user is logged in. And if a user is logged in, based on that, we will take some actions. Okay, so let's create states. I will say user, set user, and by default, it will be null. Then let's create a state for error. Let's say set error. By default, it will be an empty string. Okay, so now we need to create a function which will fetch user's data. And for that, we need to use useEffect hook. So let's say useEffect. And our dependencies will be an empty array, so that the function that we're gonna write now will run every single time our component mounts. For example, when we refresh the page and some other cases. Okay, so let's create a function called fetch user, and it will be asynchronous. And here we can say const token will be equal to localStorage dot get item, and here we need to say token. Now we didn't save any token in local storage yet, but when we do register a login, we will save our token in local storage. So even now you can immediately say that user will be null. Okay, but now we just do it here. So continue. So if there is token, we want to continue here. So we need to say try and catch block. And here, let's say const response will be equal to await Axios. But first of all, let's import Axios from Axios. So let's say import Axios from Axios. So here we need to say Axios.get method, as you remember in our routes. And then we need to provide the correct path. It will be API users me. And then here we need to say headers, authorization, bearer, and our token. As you remember, we did the same in Postman. Okay. After that, we need to say set user will be equal to response.data. In case of some errors, we can say set error will be equal to failed to fetch user data. And we can say localStorage dot remove item, and here we can see token. So let's call this function here. So let's save our file and let's continue. Okay, and we can immediately say that our user will still be null because we are not logged in yet. For that, we need to first of all log in or register. And after that, our user will not be null and we will be able to display his data on the page. Okay, so now let's work on login page. Here, let's say that we want to apply some styles to this login page, but first of all, let's go to the login page. So let's say login. And now we are in the login page. So let's add some styles to it. Let's say that min height will be screen. It will be flex and items will be center. So let's save it. Let's also say that justify will be center, and now it is completely centered. Let's also say that background color will be gray 800. I mean 100. Okay. Now let's create one more div. And inside let's create h2 tag. And here we want to see login. And to this div, we can add the following styles. Let's say that background color will be white, padding will be 8, and rounded will be large. And let's add some shadow. It will also be large. Width will be full and max width will be medium. And let's add some border, and border color will be gray 200. So let's save it. And here it is. Let's add some styles to this h2 tag. Let's say that text will be 2XL and font will be bold. Let's add some margin bottom, which will be 6. Text will be center and text color will be gray 800. Okay, Then in case of some errors, we can show it here. So let's say error, but for that we need to create a state called const error set error. By default, it will be an empty string. So if there is an error, only in that case, we want to show this p tag. And here we want to show our error. And let's add some styles to it. Let's say that text will be red 500. Margin bottom will be 4. And text will be small. Okay, so let's save it. Then we want to have a form. So let's create our form. And inside, let's create a div. Inside the div, we can create a label. So let's say that it will be email. So let's say email. And let's immediately create input. Its type has to be text. Its type has to be email, of course. So let's save it. Here it is. Okay, so let's add some styles to this label. Let's say that it will be block. And as you can see, now it is here. The input is under this label. Let's say that text color will be gray 600. Text will be small. And font will be medium. And margin bottom will be 1. Now to this input, let's add the following styles. Let's say that width will be full. As you can see, now it isn't taking the whole width. Now we save the file and it is taking the whole width. Okay. Then let's say that padding will be 3 and let's add some border. Okay. Let's say that border color will be gray 300. Then let's say that it will be rounded medium. Let's say that on focus, when we focus it, we want ring to be 2 and we want ring color to be ring blue 200. So let's save it. And as you can see, here we see blue color. But at the same time, we don't want to see this outline, so we can remove it by saying outline will be none. Okay. Now, as you can see, we have these nice effects. Okay. And also we can say that on focus, we want to have a border color, which will be blue 400. So let's save it. And as you can see, now we see this effect. It's completely up to you. You can play around with it. Okay, let's create a placeholder. And let's say enter your email. Okay, and let's say that this field has to be required. Okay, so let's copy this div and paste it here. Let's say that it will be for password. Type has to be password. Okay, to this div, let's add some margin bottom, which will be 4. And finally, let's create a button. Under this div, we can create a button. Let's say that here we want to say login. And let's add some styles to it. Let's say that width will be full and background color will be blue 500. So if I don't say that width will be full, as you can see, it is only like that. But we want it to be taken the whole width. Okay, so let's say that text will be white, padding will be 3, it will be rounded medium, and on hover we want background color to be blue 600, and font will be medium, and cursor will be pointer. Okay, and to this div, we can also add some margin bottom, which will be 6. Okay, it looks cool. So now when I click login, as you can see, we have this, please fill out this field, because here we wrote required. So now let's create a state called form data. So let's say form data set form data will be equal to use state. And here we want to have the following. Here we want to have email. By default, it will be an empty string, and password. By default, it will also be an empty string. So let's save it. Okay. Now we need to create a function called handle change. So let's do it. Handle change. Here we can get access to the event object, and then we can say set form data will be equal to, we need to keep all the previous form data that we had, and then we need to change only the current field. I mean, if I work only with password and I don't touch the email, then I need to do the following. I need to say event.target.name, and then I want to change its data with what I type by saying event.target.value. So if I don't touch email, we want to keep it as it was. And if I work with password, that's why I say event.target.name and the value that I write. Okay, so let's use this function correctly. So here type is email, and we also need to provide name, and it has to be email as well, and the value will be form data dot email, and on change we want to use this handle change function, and the same should be done here. Name has to be password, value has to be form data dot password, and on change we want to use this function. Okay, so let's save it. Now what I type here will be for the email, and what I type here will be for this password. Also, if you don't want to see this auto suggestion like john@gmail.com, you can come to this input and say the following. You can say autocomplete to be off. So here let's say autocomplete off, and now you will not see that kind of suggested emails. Okay, so let's continue. So now we need to create a function. Oh, I noticed that this state is here, but it shouldn't be here. It has to be near this form data. Okay, so now let's create a function called handle submit. So let's say const handle submit. It has to be asynchronous. Oops. It has to be asynchronous. Here we can get access to this event object, and by default we want to prevent the default behavior of a page when our page reloads after submitting a form, but we don't want to do that. So let's say try and catch block, and here let's say const response will be equal to await Axios. For that we need to import Axios. Okay, it is here. So let's say Axios.post, and then we need to provide our path, which will be API, users, and login. Well, actually right now this path will not work. We need to make some changes in our vid.config.js file. I forgot to do it, sorry. So here let's say server proxy, then API, and our target. So here we need to provide the full path. It will be http://localhost:5000. So every single time when we have this API in our code, this will be like a prefix before it. We will not see it, but it will be like a prefix before this. Okay, so in this case, before this API, we will have this. Okay, now I think that it's clear to you. So let's continue. So after providing the path, we need to provide our data, and it will be form data. Okay, and after that, we need to say localStorage.setItem. Here, let's say token. And the actual token that we need to provide will be response.data.token. So that's why here, I mean in app.js6, I said that we don't have this token yet, but we will create it. And now we are creating it. Okay. And then we need to say set user will be equal to response.data. But we don't have this function yet. We need to accept it here. To be able to accept it from app.js, we need to send it. So let's say set user will be equal to set user. So let's save it here. Okay. So here we say set user to be equal to response.data. And then after a successful login, we can navigate to the home page. But for that, we need to do the following. Under this state, let's say const navigate will be equal to use navigate that comes from React router DOM. And now we can see that we want to navigate to the home page. And in case of some errors, we can say set error to be equal to error.response data and message. So here, as you can see, we use these question marks. It's called optional chaining. So this operator safely accesses deeply nested properties. If any part of the chain is null or undefined, it stops and returns undefined instead of throwing an error. Okay. So we can show either this error or we can type it manually by saying registration failed. I mean login failed. So let's write login. Okay. So let's copy this function. And when we submit this form on submit, we need to use this function. So let's save it. Now we can log in as Martin. As you remember, in our database, we have Martin. So let's provide his credentials and check one more time that we have Martin in our database. So here, as you remember, we have Martin. Okay. So now let's click login. And if everything is successful, we should go to the home page. And also, let's say that we want to see the response. So we need to say console log response.data. So let's save it. Okay. So I will open my screen completely and let's open our console and let's click login. As you can see, now we're in the home page and in the response, we see the data of Martin. We can get access to his email, ID, token, and username. Okay, that's great. Now in app.js, we can also console log this user data. So let's try to do it. Let's say user. So now we can see in the console our user's data. So let's save our file. And now I will refresh the page and open the console. And as you can see, here we have app.js at 17. And now we can get access to the data of Martin. We can get access to his email, username, and ID. That's great. Okay. Okay, now let's create a page to be able to register. For that, I can copy all of this from login and let's paste it in register. Okay. So now I will paste it here and let's go to the register page. Okay. And here we need to say register and register. Also, we need to pass this set user from our app.js to our register. So let's take care of that. We need to copy this and paste it here. So let's save it. And here we need to say register. And we also need to have one more field here. We need to say username. Okay. And we need to say registration failed. And here we also need to say register. And let's create a field for username. So let's say username. And username. So let's save the file. And here we have our registration form. Okay, so now let's try to register. I will provide some data. So let's say Liam and liam@gmail.com and password. Now we are in the home page. So now in the home page, we can do the following. Here we can show users data, and if there are some errors, we can also show them. So here we need to get access to user and error. So for that, here we need to pass user and error to this home component. So let's do it. User will be equal to user and error will be equal to error. So let's save our file, and here let's do the following. So to this div, let's apply the following styles. Let's say that min height will be screen, it will be flex, items will be center, and justify will be center. So let's save it. And now we don't see anything. We have an error. Looks like we have an error. And we have uses is not defined at app.j640. Okay. Here we need to say user. So let's save it. Okay. So now we have home, and let's say that background color will be gray 100. So let's save it. Okay. Now let's create one more div. And here, if there are some errors, we can say error, and only if there is some error, we can show this actual error. And let's apply some styles to it. Let's say that text will be red 500, margin bottom will be 4, and text will be small. Okay. And then if user is true, only then we want to show the following data. Here we want to have a div. Okay. So if user is true, we want to show this. If user isn't true, we want to show this. Okay. So if user is true, let's create h2 tag, and let's say user.username, and we can get access to his email too. So let's say user.email. So now if I open the console, you can see that here we have this object. And now if I open it, you can see that here we have liam@gmail.com, Liam, and so on. It means that we can get access to this data. Okay. So now let's save this file. And as you can see, we can display the data of a currently logged in user. Okay. So now let's keep adding some styles to it and continue. So to this h2, we can say text will be 2XL, font will be bold, margin bottom will be 4, text will be gray 800, and let's say welcome Liam. Okay. Then to this p tag, let's add the following styles. Let's say that text will be gray 600, and let's add some text which will be email and colon. Okay. And to this div, which contains this error and this user, we can say that background color will be white, padding will be 8, and rounded will be large. Let's add some shadow, which will be medium, width will be full, and max width will be large. And let's say that text will be center. So let's save it. And here we go. Okay, here is how it looks on bigger screens. Okay, and here we can add some padding. Let's say that it will be 4. Okay, now it looks much better. So if a user is logged in, we want to show this data. We want to show his username and email. But if a user isn't logged in, we can do the following. We can copy this and let's paste it here. So we need to remove this username, and styles will be the same here. And here let's say welcome. Okay. and we can create a p tag, and we can say, please log in or register. And after this p tag, we can create a div which will contain links which will lead to login and register pages respectively. So let's create a link. We can import it from React Router DOM, and here we can say login, and the path will be to the login page. Okay, and the same should be done to the register. So here let's say register and register. Okay, so let's save it, but now we will not see it, and we can only style it when we will be logged out. Let's take care of Navbar component. Okay, so Navbar should also get access to the user and set user. For that, from app.js, we can pass them. We can pass these properties to Navbar. So let's say set user will be equal to set user. So let's save it. Okay. And now let's say that instead of div, we want to use navigation. Okay. And let's add some styles to this navigation. Let's say that background color will be gray 800 and padding will be 4. Okay. For now, let's say that text will be white. And here we can create a div. And inside this div, let's create a link which comes from React Router DOM. And here let's say MERN auth. Okay. And to this link, let's say that it will lead to the home page. It will navigate to the home page. And let's add some styles. Let's say that text will be white. So now we can remove it from here. Okay. And let's say that text will be large and font will be bold. So let's save it. Okay. Now, if user is true, we want to show some buttons based on that. So for that, we can create a div, and here we can say, if user is true, we can show logout button. So let's say button and logout. And if a user isn't true, we want to show links to register and login. So here let's create a fragment, and here we want to say link, and here let's say login. Here let's say login, which will lead to the login page, and the same should be done for the register. So here let's say register and register. So let's save it. And as you can see, here we have this logout button. So let's say that here we want to have text will be white so that we can see it. Now to this div, which contains this link and this div, let's add the following styles. Let's say that it will be container. Then we want to center it, so it will be like margin left will be auto and margin right will be auto. And now if we hover over, you can see all the beauty of Tailwind CSS. Okay. Now let's say that it will be flex and justify will be between and items will be center. Okay. Now to this button, let's add the following styles. Let's say that background color will be red 500, padding horizontally will be 4, vertically it will be 2, and it will be rounded. And let's say that on hover, we want background color to be red 600. Okay, so now let's save the file. And as you can see, now we have this button. But now if I click, nothing is happening. So let's create a functionality to handle that. So let's create a function called handle logout. And here we can do the following. So if a user is logged out, we want to navigate him to the login page. For that, we need to say const navigate will be equal to use navigate, which comes from React Router DOM. Then let's do the following. Let's say that we want to remove our token from local storage. So let's say local storage user.remove item and token. And then we want to say that set user, we want our user to be null after a user logs out, and we want to navigate him to the home page. Okay, so let's copy this function, and when we click this button, we want to use this function. So let's save this file and click this button. So as you can see, now here we can see this login and register. I don't know if you see it, but I see it. And now we have this welcome, please login or register. So now let's style them. So let's first of all style these two links. So let's say that text will be white. Okay, let's say that horizontally we want our margin to be 2, and on hover we want it to be underline. And let's copy these styles and apply it to this link. Okay, and now let's style this. It has to be in our home.jsx. So let's add some styles to this p tag. Let's say that text will be 2XL, font will be bold, margin bottom will be 6, and text will be gray 700. And let's say that text will be gray 800. So let's save it. Okay. Here, let's say that margin bottom will be 6. Oops. Okay. And to this div, let's add the following styles. Let's say that it will be flex, and flex direction will be column. Okay. To this link, let's add the following styles. Let's say that width will be full, and background color will be blue 500, text will be white, padding will be 3, rounded will be medium, and on hover we want our color to be a bit darker, so it will be 600, and then font will be medium. So let's save it. Here we go. Okay, now let's copy these styles and apply it to this link. And the color here has to be gray. So let's say that it will be gray. And first of all, by default, it will be 200. And on hover, it has to be 300. Okay. And text color has to be gray 800. So let's change it to be visible. It will be gray 800. And let's add some space vertically. Okay. So now let's try to go to the login page. Okay. To the register page. Let's click these buttons. Okay. Now let's try to refresh the page. Okay. So now let's try to log in. I will log in as Martin. Great. But now we see only email and we don't see the name for some reason. We don't see the username. It's really strange. So let's try to find out why. Wow. Here we have username. It has to be an error. Let's check it out. Here we have username. But here we see username. Probably we made this error when we tested our routes. Oh, as you can see, here we have username. Instead, we should say username. Okay. Okay. And here in the login route, let's also say username. So let's save it. Okay. Now, as you can see, when we refresh the page for a few seconds, we can see the login form. But we don't want to do that. So in the app.jsx component, we can do the following. We can create a state called isLoading. So let's say isLoading, set isLoading will be equal to useState, and by default it will be true. Okay, and then there has to be a moment when we need to make it to be false. So here we can say set loading to be false, and then for that little time when is loading is true, we can do the following. So let's say if is loading, if it is true, we can return the following. We can say div, and here let's say loading, and let's add some styles to it. Let's say that min height will be screen, background color will be gray 900 and flex, and then let's say that items will be center and justify will be center. And let's also say that we want to wrap this text in a separate div, and to this div we can say that class name, we can say that text will be XL and text will be white. So let's save it. And as you can see, now when we refresh the page, we see this loading. I think that it's a much better experience. Okay, now let's try to go to the login page even if we are logged in. As you can see, it is possible, but I don't want it to be possible. Let's try to go to the register page, and it is possible as well. So let's get back to the home page. Now to handle that, we can do the following. So here, when it comes to this login, let's say the following. So if user is true, then we want to do the following. We want to navigate. So we need to see navigate, that comes from React Router DOM, as you can see. So we want to navigate to the home page if a user is logged in. So let's say to the home page, okay? And if a user isn't logged in, he should go to the login page. So let's save it. Now if I try to go to the login page, as you can see, I can't do that, but now I can go to the register page. Okay, so let's do the same to this register. So if user is true, we can do this. Okay, let's save it. And now I can't go to the register page and to the login page. That's it. Now I will try to log out, and let's refresh the page. Let's try to register. Let's say Robert. Let's say robert@gmail.com and provide password and click this button. And as you can see, we still don't see his username. And here we still have this username. As you can see, we still have this username even though we changed it. I think that we just need to restart our server and try one more time. Okay, now let's say npm run dev and start our server. Okay, server started. I will click logout and I will say register. Now let's say add-in at gmail.com and password. As you can see, now we immediately see the username that we want to see. Now let's open the console. And here we have username. So I'm really sorry guys that I made that mistake. I didn't really notice it, but we managed to find our problem and we managed to solve it. I think that that's the most important thing. Thank you for understanding. Now let's close the console and let's see if we have add-in in our database. So let's refresh the page. And here we have our users and add-in as well. Okay, so now let's try to refresh the page. Great, now let's try to go to the login page or to the register page. We can't go there. Let's go to the login page. Okay, now we can also handle the case when a user tries to go to a page that doesn't exist yet. So let's try to do it. So for that, let's create a component called notFound. Let's immediately add some styles to it. Let's say that min height will be screen. It will be flex, items will be center, justify will be center, background color will be gray 900, for example, text will be white and text will be 2XL. And let's say for the text, let's say 404, page not found. So let's save it. And now we can add a catch-all route using the star. So let's do the following. Let's say route, and the path will be this star, okay, and the element will be this not found. So let's import it. Okay, so let's save the file. Now let's try to go to a certain page that doesn't exist. As you can see, we have page not found. Okay, and now we need to go back, and now this page exists. You can also add a link. So let's say that we go to this page that doesn't exist. You can also add a link here, like go to the home page. It's completely up to you, and you can play around with it as much as you want. Okay, now let's click this MERN with logo and get back to the home page. And if you want, you can watch some of my other videos that I have on my channel. Go and check them out. So that's it, guys. If you find this video helpful, please hit the like button and subscribe to this channel if you haven't done it yet.